Hey everybody, pull up a seat. I have just topped off my glass. Why don't you grab your favorite beverage and join me? This is the Paddy Wagon. Welcome to the Paddy Wagon, everyone. Today we're joined by Alec Crawford, and he is a leading expert at the forefront of one of the most crucial conversations in tech today, and that is the safe and responsible development of artificial intelligence, or AI, right? If you know one, you know both, or maybe you don't. So he's the founder and CEO of an AI risk management company, as I will say, perfectly named Artificial Intelligence Risk Inc., as well as the host of the AI Risk Reward podcast, which is another great name, given what we'll be talking about today. Things like ethical concerns, regulatory compliance, to managing unintended consequences. So, Alec, thank you for joining us today.
Mike, great to be here. That was a great intro. Thank you.
I try my best. You always, you never know who knows what about the guest or the subject matter. And I think it's such an interesting topic. I think it scares a lot of people. I think it excites a lot of people. I'm more on the excitement side, but, I think the goal with anything in life is about learning and let people come up with their own idea based off of the facts and so on. So yeah, it's kind of been very excited to have somebody on in your space, just because it's, like I said, it's such a cool thing that we're seeing, and more than anybody how cool and kind of scary that can be. So again, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, it's awesome. Well, Gen AI is super cool. And I think, look, AI has been going on for a super long time. Like, I was building neural networks from scratch in the 1980s. And I think what's really changed the game is just it's so accessible now, right? You just type something into ChatGPT or whatever, and oh my God, it's talking to you, right? It does not take any technical knowledge.
It's amazing. What was that movie they had out a couple years ago? Her? Was it Her?
Oh yeah, the guy fell in love with a computer, basically, which it's kind of happening for real occasionally now, unfortunately, for better or worse, I think.
It was a bizarre movie when you saw it, but you knew it wasn't that far-fetched. And I feel like if I went and watched that movie again today, I would be like, oh wow, that they had it spot on. Like, they really probably did. I've not seen it since it came out, but that was a movie that kind of popped into my head. When I was thinking about having you on.
It's surprising, but one of the most popular uses for large language models right now is for these friend chatbots, which seems kind of crazy, right? Don't you have enough friends to talk to and hang out with? But apparently that's a thing. So
maybe those friends will always tell you what you want, right?
Could be. I mean,
you
remember the journalist who got access to an early version of ChatGPT and was trying to convince him to divorce his wife. So
I did. I'm unaware of that. That's for real.
Look that one up. Yeah,
that's funny.
Pretty crazy, right? No, I want to be your girlfriend. You should divorce your wife. I'm like, what? Like,
wow, those are great. Yeah, whoever was developing that one, they said, all right, let's tone this back a little bit. That's it's a bit much. Oh my! Are you? You mentioned prior to starting the recording, you're having a drink with us today.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm having a kind of unusual drink. It's called an Americano. It's soda water, Campari, and sweet vermouth. In this case, I make my own vermouth, so I'm looking for excuses to use it. And think of it as like a Negroni without the gin. So not high alcohol, very refreshing, perfect for complex topics like AI and AI safety, ethics, etc.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's now I feel like I should have made something. I poured some Russell's Reserve into a glass and some ice cubes. I do not make my own vermouth, which actually, on that subject, what goes into vermouth? That's something it's in some drinks, but I don't think you ever think of making your own.
I think, well, first of all, to be a cocktail, something has to have 3 ingredients, not including ice, Mike, just as a heads up. And then,
I didn't know that.
yeah.
That's funny. I did not know that.
Isn't that funny?
I figured it was probably 2, not including ice.
Hey, I don't make this stuff up. It's not my rules. So vermouth, so it goes back in time to why did people start making vermouth? Well, it was because they opened a bottle of wine and tried it and said, wow, this doesn't taste so great anymore. How can we make this drinkable? And they basically added different herbs and ingredients, or in my case, sugar to make it sweet, to make it palatable, right? And then you'd use it as either you drink it straight or you'd use it as a mixer in a cocktail or other beverage. The main herb ingredient is actually wormwood, which is what you make absinthe out of.
I was pointing at the screen. Bitter. I knew where you were going with that one, because that's the only thing I've ever heard with wormwood.
Yeah, and it's very bitter, so that kind of balances the wine. And then I use all kinds of organic herbs from my wife's garden, mint and sage, and then other stuff that's more Christmassy, like cloves and cinnamon and things like that. So
nice.
It's but the secret ingredient is it will remain a secret, though.
Keep it a secret.
What makes it so fabulous.
You can't trust these savages that listen to this show.
It's not sugar. It's not sugar.
Do people drink that straight?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's more of a European thing. People drinking vermouth before, after dinner, and there are versions which are not sweet, obviously. So if you think about martinis, what are people pouring in? Well, it's dry vermouth, right?
Right.
And they'll have all kinds of botanicals in there and stuff like that. So,
what's the alcohol content on vermouth?
Yeah, typically it's around 17%, so a little higher than wine. I make mine intentionally higher. I make it 20. 'Cause it just lasts for longer. You can open a bottle, leave it in the fridge for a while, and not get too worried about it.
Nice. Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, like I said, bringing something fancy here, unlike myself.
Yeah.
So,
well, I had a couple extra minutes,
There you go. I like it. I listen, I've had guests drink water, which is fine, and coffee, which is fine. I like all of those, but that little extra effort just to bring on something cool. And now I'm going to go ahead and I've got some drinks to try. I've got an ongoing list here, so that's going to be on the list there. I tell you what, you actually brought up something I wanted to ask you about. So you mentioned prior to us speaking, and then you just kind of touched on it right now, about building neural networks back in the 80s.
Yeah.
Can you kind of give that to us in an easily digestible, hey, I don't know what AI is. I don't know what neural networks are. Can you explain it to our listeners in kind of a simplified version of what it actually is?
Sure. So, look, the main difference between AI, or what we think about Gen AI, and more broadly machine learning or neural networks versus traditional computer programming was traditional computer programming. You sat down and wrote a program. You basically told the computer what to do. Just the way you might train your dog to do something or something like that, right? Like do it over and over again. Eventually it learns how to do it.
Okay.
For machine learning and neural networks, instead, you're giving the computer examples of things and how to do them, right? So in other words, it's teaching itself how to do something. So in my case, back in the 80s, I was teaching computers how to play poker, right? So how do you do that? You basically let it play poker hands over and over again in a game, in a simulated game, and it learns, when do I win and when do I lose, right? And when's betting a good idea, when's bluffing a good idea, when's folding a good idea. And back then, what I really learned was the computers weren't powerful enough. So it was still kind of an average poker player, which is not bad, but now you can create bots that are the best poker players in the world, right? Because they understand odds. They don't have tells, right? Like they're just really, really good, similar to the way that computers can beat every human at chess and backgammon and even Go now, which was considered very, very hard. And yep, guess what? The best Go player in the world is now a computer.
Chess, I get. I would picture a stalemate or the computer winning every time. Poker, I feel, is a little different. I feel that it's still, there's the advantage to the computer, but because there are things like bluffs and, who knows? I mean, a bluff can be a lot of different things. What are the odds like, if the world's best poker player was to play a machine, how often do you think the player would win?
Yeah, that's a great question. I can't answer that, but there are literally, groups out there in different parts of the world building poker bots and putting them in online poker games and winning money. Right? That's kind of their job, and it's also become how do you call this? Turn into something more corporate, where what the online poker companies have discovered is that the worst thing they can do is have people wait to start a game. Right. So if people are sitting there for 10 minutes, like, oh, I'm just waiting for the table to have 6 or 8 people at it, they eventually just get bored, wander away, stop, quit, whatever.
Yep.
So what they've started doing is they'll start a game early and throw a couple bots in there, right? They're just kind of like, playing poker along with the humans, and they will give them personalities like Mr. Bluffer or, Mr. Folds all the time or whatever, right? And the humans are just sitting there going like, oh, this is fine. And as other humans come in, they replace the bots. So they will always have a table ready for you, Mike, when you show up.
Good or bad, depending on how you answer this question. Love poker. I was playing Poker Stars back when it was first out. I absolutely love poker. And, I think it was someone like my dad. Like, can you trust that? Of course you can trust it. But the question is, right, so if I'm playing a cash game where you wouldn't do a tournament with the bots, but if I'm playing a cash game, are those bots set up to where they can actually win some of the hands? And if they do, right, where does that money go? Does that go to the house? Because that's kind of an ethical dilemma that is part of the reason why we're here today.
Yeah,
is the house always wins.
Yeah. Well, look, they could put bots in there that are amazing and to kick everyone's butt. Like, that's not their goal, right? Their goal is like, hey, have people stick around.
Just keep it moving.
Yeah, just keep it moving, right? But the flip side of that is people are putting bots on those games and not telling people they're bots, right? The other obvious thing that can happen is collusion, right? Where multiple people are at the same table or whatever, and they're talking to each other or literally sitting next to each other with laptops and saying, hey, are you going to bluff or fold? Like, hey, what's your hand, right? Like, even 2 people colluding at a poker table is really, really bad for everyone else's chances, not to mention bad ethically and probably legally.
Yeah, that's a great scenario I've never thought of, surprisingly. And now I don't, I'll sit down and play $20 or, maybe if I'm feeling crazy, 100, but I do like my poker games to be in person where I can actually see the people. I wonder what legally, ethically, we know it's wrong, but now I'm curious if I get, 7 of my friends over and there's one other poor soul that isn't in the room, is that a legal issue?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not a lawyer, but all I know is
it doesn't seem good.
Lots of stuff to do with poker isn't legal anyway, so whatever.
Yeah, that's a good point. The computing power you mentioned back in the 80s. I mean, my gosh, even way before then, you'd have kind of these rooms that were filled with what we wouldn't call processing power today. We've got more powerful phones sitting in our pocket, all the time. So, but you obviously knew back then, hey, we're onto something here. And these computers, they're not where our brains are at right now. But if we can get these, the technology piece down, we have something really usable. How long ago do you think somebody truly understood that what we have today in terms of AI was a real possibility? And they said, hey, this is where it's going to be.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I think, Ray Kurzweil, a long time ago, I don't remember when he wrote his first book. It might have even been in the 70s, but he predicted that we would have artificial general intelligence, right? And then he updated his book or wrote a sequel, or whatever you want to call it, over the last year, I think. And the first book was called The Singularity, which is the word he uses or coined for AGI, is near, and the sequel was The Singularity is Nearer. So,
Yep.
I think he just was trying to make a little extra money there, to be honest.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's a lot of difference between book one and book two. But yeah, what I would say is back in the 80s, we could get computers even then to kind of understand some natural language. We get them to learn things. We just knew there wasn't enough computing power. I think there were a handful of failures of imagination, not tons. One was the degree to which large language models have been successful, right? And even you talk to even to the people that designed, transformers and built these models and designed them, and truly there's 100 people in the world that completely understand how they work and can build one from scratch, right? It's not a long list. And even they are sitting there going like, I have no idea how that worked, right? We're doing something like, and not something totally from scratch, not like write an essay on World War II, because it's got access to everything and it can basically summarize or change. But if you start with something else, like, hey, here's my term paper on XYZ, please, fix the grammar and add an extra section. Like, that's pretty crazy, right? Like, that's like beyond what most people in the 80s would have believed was plausible at this point in time, I think. And I think going back to the singularity and artificial general intelligence, which I do believe will happen at some point. I don't think it's going to happen as soon as most people think, but the thing that's most kind of scary about that is once you have a computer that thinks like a human, is conscious, is as smart as a human, what's the first thing you do? You say, hey, build a smarter computer, right?
Right.
And a smarter version of yourself. And within, I don't know, a year, couple years at most, like you've got something that's 10 times or 100 times smarter than human, and then you really have a problem potentially. Right?
Yeah,
that's more the scary part. Like, I don't think there's that much scary about another computer that's just as smart as you. Hey, there's billions of us, but one that's 100 times as smart and connected to the internet. Ooh, that's we're going to need some guardrails around that for sure.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that you hear, and you don't know what's true. I hate to say it, but like when you turn on the news or you read articles anymore, you don't know what to believe. I don't know the percentage, but I heard there's a good number of articles that are out there floating around as if a journalist wrote them and it's actually created by AI. I think that's scary.
Yeah.
It's, listen, if it's going to tell me the weather, I'm okay with that. They can't be any more wrong than a human counterpart already is. But yeah, you've got some concerns there. I think about, having kids. And I think one of the things is, you didn't learn to get where you're at because of ChatGPT. It's like, okay, well, I know all the questions. Let me type in. I get the answers. Here's the answers. Okay, congratulations. I've now got a doctorate of this and I'm the best at, but at the end of the day, you're not going to learn. The human brain doesn't learn by having a computer answer the questions for them. We learn the way we learn. Ethically, morally, I would think there's probably going to be kids I guarantee they're already doing it, but that they're cheating. And it's scary when you have such a powerful tool and you don't have I don't want to say the brain capacity, but at that young age, yeah, it's a quick fix. Hey, I can answer the questions to this test really quick, but the downstream effect of 10 years of not answering or doing any of the research for your own problems to solve, like that's a problem that like I truthfully didn't even think of until I'm sitting here talking with you about that.
Yeah, it's already a thing, right? And I think schools have redesigned their curriculums, so it's like harder to do that. There's software out there like Polygraph that will detect AI content.
Really? How does it do that? That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's something I'm not an expert at. If you want to figure that out, call Yago Brahimov, who's the CEO of that company, and ask
Yeah.
him, because he'll probably have a pretty good answer. But probabilistically, think about it this way: a large language model, it's actually very straightforward. It sounds surprisingly simple, right? All it's trying to do is take a string of words, which it breaks up into what they call tokens, which is combinations of letters, and figure out what the correct next token is. That's it, right? And each one of those is probabilistic, meaning like one's more likely than another. So if you have a string of, so think about it as a math problem. If I have a string of, so let's forget about words and call it symbols, right?
Okay.
If I have a string of 100 symbols, and then I have a table here that says, after each symbol, here's the likelihood of the next symbol being something different. It's just basically turns into a math problem where you can multiply them all out and go, what's the probability that this was generated by AI? Is it 0? Is it 90%? Is it 100? So I'll give you an example of how that might work. If the AI has something where one symbol can never follow another, it's a 0% chance, and you ever see that in some text, and you're like, in your string of 100 characters, and you go, not from AI, 0%.
Interesting.
Right? Or
Okay.
vice versa, like, oh, okay, these are a highly probable series. Now, the problem that's happened in academia, going back to that, is that these things are not always right. So and apparently for some reason, they flag human content from non-English speakers as more likely to be, hey, this is AI generated. So you've got roughly 1% of students who get called, up in front of the dean or whatever, or the professor, or like, hey, you generated this with AI. And they're, no, I swear, I just used Grammarly to check my grammar or whatever. And they're in huge trouble, right? And they could be completely innocent, and people are kind of trusting the software to be right and using it as the oracle. It's not going to be right 100% of the time. It's just not. Right?
Yeah.
Not at this point. And over time, it's going to become a little bit of a cat and mouse game, right? Like, well, oh, I generated this with AI. Oh, and now I'm going to use this other piece of software to make it look like I wrote it. Like, are they going to catch me? Like, it's gonna be a little bit of a mess. What's interesting is, so when my kids were growing up, my daughter was the first user of Facebook, and she was a teenager, right? And so she was exposed to that, and she used it to figure out, oh, what are my friends doing, right? And if you're doing searches, you went to Google, right? If you're trying to look up stuff on the internet, that's changing, right? Where now, if you talk to someone who's in 5th grade and you say, hey, tell me about, the Red Scare or something like that, they're not going to Google. They're asking ChatGPT.
Yeah. I see a lot of, if I am to, because I'm a Googler. I don't know if that's the right term, but I still consider myself a Googler. I notice a lot of the top results are all Reddit links, and that scares me because, I mean, it's just a bunch of people in a chat room at the end of the day talking, and who knows who's right, but those are, I mean, a lot of times first 3 or 4 results that come back your way.
Yeah.
So
Interesting. Yeah. And also I think, some of the large language model companies have also cut deals with Reddit as well. I mean, I think they're trying to monetize their quote property unquote as fast as they can.
Yeah. I've always thought that, I'm a geek, all right? And I think it's a geek, right? I assume I may be speaking with a geeks or somebody who considers themselves
we're
a
geeks.
geek. And that's, I think that's a fun thing. I love talking with people that have a passion about something like this. My thing with technology was always practicality. Is it useful? Does it serve a purpose? And, if I'm building a PC, which still to this day, if I want something, I go build it. And so it's like, okay, I want to build a server to have all my movies to stream. I don't have to worry about a graphics card. I don't have to worry. I just need some computing power, good network connection, and some software to run it and do the job. If I want to build a gaming PC or I want to build a workstation for drafting, there's different types of now graphics cards, and we get into. So my first question was always, what am I trying to accomplish by building this? And a lot of the times it was something like listen to music, have a big hard drive to be able to store things, access my files, and call it a day. That people that don't know that stuff think everything is like everything's out to get them, or right, there's the fear of these computers when, in reality, it's just like, hey, this was created to solve a simple problem. But the people that don't know any better, there's a genuine fear of the unknown, right? And it's this: the computer's going to take my job. It's like the Terminator unfolding before your eye. I think that's everyone's reference point is the Terminator franchise. What are some examples that you can think of that would help people see the upside, where it's like, hey, listen, this is not all bad. Here's why this exists. We are trying to solve this problem by doing this. But again, much like the internet, you don't know what's true or what's false anymore when you look things up.
It's a good point. Actually, it's a super interesting study. I can't remember what it was. It might have been showed up in The Economist. Was that the majority of people in the U.S. are concerned about AI and robots, probably because they watch the Terminator movies, like you said. And it's completely the opposite in Japan, where everybody's like, oh, robots and AI are awesome, because they watched all these cartoons as kids, which showed super friendly, nice robots. So it's kind of funny that it ends up being cultural.
That's very
right?
interesting. That's
Based
really
on
interesting.
What did you watch, right? So, so I think there are some incredible things for good happening in AI. And look, like a lot of people think about ChatGPT, like, oh, I could write a poem, I could look stuff up, I can, transcribe and summarize meetings, things like that. All those things are cool, and there's a lot of efficiency tools in there. But there are game-changing technologies as well. So great example of that is Atropos Health. It's run by my friend Brigham Hyde, is a co-founder and CEO. And what do? They basically have a database of all the kind of academic medical research, right? So you go to your doctor, you're giving them your symptoms. It's very complicated. They do tests and blah, 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 and all that, and they still can't figure out what's going on. Within 5 minutes, the Atropos Health software will search all these different, medical journals and papers and things like that, and basically come back with effectively custom research for your doctor for you that says, hey, we can't diagnose Mike, but here's 3 papers that we think are relevant, and the summary of those papers is X, Y, and Z, and Mike probably has ABC, right? Like, that's unbelievable because, look, there's so much research coming out for doctors these days. No human could possibly read it all.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But to have that kind of literally specialized medical research for you and for your condition, and that will be available at some point to anybody in the medical field with 5 minutes notice, or, in the future, less, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Right?
I think of things like cancer treatments, and so, running scenarios through these, again, complex, but sometimes when you think about it, very simple programs and return results. An example like that is you could probably diagnose what could be a fatal illness earlier. So maybe, you've got some of the Terminator folks that this could be something that changes their life for the good. It's like, hey,
terminate that cancer.
Yeah, I'm going to terminate that cancer. I'm sitting here thinking of the Terminator the whole time. And meanwhile, this doctor plugs some of these things in to the computer and says, hey, 2 of these 3 articles, we need to maybe look into this. There's some similarities with maybe some cancers that we've seen in the past, and especially rare ones where you don't have these things come up all the time. Oh, my lungs, I'm coughing. All right, oh, okay, well, you have lung cancer, and based off this, here's a certain type of name associated with that, where there's so many diseases that 1 in 1 million people might have it, and this computer can get those results back to you pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So that's something where it's exciting.
Yeah, definitely. That's cool. And I think the combination of personalized genomic medicine and AI is going to be pretty amazing over the next 10 or 20 years. And I don't think it's a matter of whether it will happen or not. I think it will. I think the question is really how expensive is that going to be, right?
Yeah, right.
Because initially it will probably be crazy expensive. Eventually it won't, right? As it all gets automated. But yeah, it's going to be tricky. There's a lot of ethical questions around AI, and I sit on the executive board of the Global AI Ethics Institute, and going back to the whole international thing, like our version of that may be very different from other countries, right? What do we consider ethical and not? But at least for the U.S., my personal goal is to end up with a version of AI where people are happy. We don't have the Terminator. People kind of have their own co-pilot, and all the parts of your job that you don't like, the computer's doing for you, right?
You're speaking my
awesome,
language,
right?
buddy.
Yeah. The flip side of that, of course, is the future where, computers are taking people's jobs and we've got, huge unemployment, right? I don't see that happening. But I think also we have to be careful about that too, right? Just consciously think about like, how are we going to adopt this technology so we don't end up with a problem?
Yeah, with a 37% unemployment rate, right?
Yeah, but the answer is not just to stop development, right? Because if you remember when Elon Musk and some other people were like, "Oh, we should just pause AI development for 6 months in the U.S." I'm like, "Well, what do you think the Chinese are doing?"
Why pause it?
They ain't pausing it, right? Like, because they were concerned about safety at that point. I'm like, that's a terrible idea because I think it's going to be. I mean, it's pretty clear that the government and in the U.S. has decided that we need to stay ahead of the rest of the world in terms of AI development because there are huge, military advantages to that, not just advantages at work or writing haiku on a random Monday night.
That's an excellent point. One of the, so that kind of, so I'm a recruiter, and it's like, what do you like about recruiting? The answer is easy. I love working with people. It's the best part of my job is working with people. Oh, cool. That's cool. That's great. What's the worst part of your job? Oh, that's easy. It's working with people. Right? That's the worst part of my job because my job involves people. Everything I do day in, day out is people, right? When you think of things like AI, right, we have a fear of the unknown. We have a fear of this computer. We have a fear of, the Terminator, as I've said a couple times. Maybe the fear is the people, right? The people running it, because I think garbage in, garbage out, a computer system, even though they learn, we as humans can put restrictions on things. Don't pause it like Elon Musk said. Do it ethically as we move along. We're trying to solve a problem. This problem has presented itself, or I foresee this problem in the next 3 months. Let's get out ahead of that. You don't stop moving towards it because at the end of the day, that problem is still going to persist in the future. So let's think about it the right way, get to it, and then we get there, fix it. What are some of the downsides that you see in your work? Is it the people? Is it the computing power? Like, what are some of the things that when somebody has a fear where you can say, okay, you know what, this is all right. Here's something.
Yeah. Well, let's start with, I think 5 years from now, the people who adopt AI and understand AI and use AI in their work will almost certainly be doing better as a group than the people who shun AI and decide not to use AI. And if you extend that past people to the businesses they work at, given the obvious stuff like gains of efficiency and the less obvious stuff like more creativity or really being able to do things you couldn't do before, yeah, like I think if you could come up with a stock portfolio that was like, I'm going to own the companies of the stocks of companies that are really doing incredible things with AI and are really advanced, but not wasting too much money on it, and not own the stocks of the other companies, you're probably going to make money, right?
Right.
Um, so, what are some things that that might concern me about AI right now? Look, number one is privacy risk, right? I think
100%.
that people are typing stuff into ChatGPT. Huge article in the Atlantic about people having very personal, very private conversations with ChatGPT and had no idea that they would be outed later. Right? Literally,
Interesting.
a guy talking about like getting divorced from his wife and kids with suicidal ideation and all this stuff. You're sitting there going like, how the heck did that get made public?
How
Right?
did it
Well,
be? Was it made public? Did somebody leave their search string open, or was it like, oh, we're going to out this person?
yeah, it's unclear, right, for a lot of them. But the point is, if you're in the public version of any chatbot or ChatGPT, like whatever you're saying could be discovered, right? And
Yeah.
a very simple example of that is, oh, you're like, oh, are you sure? Why would that be, Alec? All right, well, try this. Like, do a bunch of stuff in ChatGPT, go back a week later and see what's in your history.
Yeah.
It's all there, right? So it's obviously keeping a record of it somewhere,
Right.
and that record can be exposed, right? So yeah, not great. And by the way, they're turning around and taking literally everything that's typed in that they're allowed to and using it to train the next version of the model, right? So yeah, so privacy is really number one. And that's obviously a very personal version there of these people having kind of in-depth conversations with ChatGPT, kind of like their friends. But then you've got stuff like people putting customer information in or writing a press release, using the public version of ChatGPT, all of which could be revealed at any moment, right? Not to mention the legal problems of doing stuff like that, like revealing customer information somewhere that's in an insecure system. So we'll start with AI privacy, both at the corporate level where they might have these huge databases with all kinds of consumer information, and down to the individual level, like don't type stuff into ChatGPT you don't want other people to know, right? So what's interesting to me is that, look, if you're a tech company or even not a tech company but using tech and you're a little behind the curve, like you're ripe for cybersecurity disaster, right? That's
Right.
pretty clear, right? You've got to stay at the cutting edge of cybersecurity and pair that with companies are out there under a lot of pressure to adopt AI and Gen AI, both because their people want it, the CEOs like we got to keep up with the Joneses, their competitors are doing it, and sometimes they're perhaps not doing that as thoughtfully as they could, meaning, ooh, is all the cybersecurity in place for that? Because as you adopt Gen AI, you're creating all kinds of new attack surfaces for the bad guys.
Yep.
What if they steal your graph database, right? What if they hack in and get access to your version of ChatGPT with all your customer information in it and just, exfiltrate that data? There's all kinds of ways things can go wrong. And what you need is software that will provide the guardrails and protect it. And there's really kind of four different categories there that I think about. Governance, like kind of who can do what with AI, like who can see what data and models and who can use what. And that's very basic kind of cybersecurity approach, right? Don't let everybody be a super user. Like that's just
Right.
dumb, right? And then you've got risk management, right? So it's all the not safe for work guardrails that you already have on the internet and encrypting data in motion and at rest, especially personal information. And then you got the regulatory compliance stuff. Like literally there's like 100 laws waiting to get passed in Congress about AI, of which maybe 3 will get passed. But like literally every week there's some new rule about AI somewhere in the world. Like if you're not keeping up with that, like you could really end up with a problem. And finally, the cybersecurity part, where start by just having everything inside your private cloud or on-prem, wherever possible, and end up with things that will detect hacks on AI and detect attempted data exfiltration and things that will flag back your command center, because what most cybersecurity professionals will tell you, it's not a matter of if you get hacked, but when.
Oh,
And then
yeah.
your job is really figuring out how quickly can we figure it out so we can kick them out and shut them down and mitigate the damage. I would bet you that most Gen AI systems at most companies are incapable of doing that, meaning someone could sit there for 2 weeks and exfiltrate data and they'd never know.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Or they don't know until it's too late. We spend all this time encrypting databases and making sure customer information is safe and all that kind of stuff. And all it takes is one guy going in, hey, I got access to, chat GPT at some big company, and just sits there and says, tell me all the secrets, right? Who are the top 100 clients? Give me all their information, right? And, 2 weeks later, they're selling it on the dark web in your host.
It's funny because as a recruiter, I do a lot of finance, a lot of IT, and luckily I'm the main, so the company I work for is Fortune 100 company. The bigger you are, the bigger the target on your back for your data, user data, customer data, everything like you're talking about. So anytime I'm working with our corporate infrastructure security team, like I kind of like rub my hands together and I say, okay, tell me something fun that maybe a recent attack, give me as much detail as you can without losing your job. That's ethical. Just give me some funny stories. Give me some good stories. Give me some cool things that you've seen or some not cool things. And the stories are crazy. They're crazy, but some of them are so simple. And it goes back to so-and-so left a password on their desk. It wasn't elaborate at all, or it was a phishing attempt.
I do have a crazy elaborate story for you.
Give me crazy elaborate. We like those too.
So this belongs to a defense contractor that shall not be named.
Fair enough.
So defense contractor's executive assistant runs a 5K. A bunch of really nice people are there. Hey, let me take your picture at the finish line. Okay, cool. Oh, thank you so much. Email her the photo. The photo has a Trojan horse attached to it. Downloads the photo, Trojan horse. That Trojan horse makes its way from her phone or personal computer onto her work computer at the defense contractor. Of course, she's going back and forth with her boss in terms of emails, and information gets revealed. And bad things happen. It takes them 6 months to figure this out, or whatever, some long period of time.
It's so
Meanwhile,
simple.
they're doing the whole thing, key logging her, the whole thing, everything that happens. Definitely bad stuff happened there. So just imagine how elaborate that was. It was an in-person spear phishing attack.
Hats off to them.
We know this guy's assistant is running a 5K. We're going to take a picture. We're going to embed a Trojan horse. We're going to email it to her. Blah, 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 blah. Like, incredible. Like, who'd have thought to warn this person, hey, whatever you do, like, don't open, like, emails of photos from people you don't know. Like, what? Like,
wow.
It's crazy.
I am a cybersecurity. So did the person say, hey, pause for a picture? Or did they just snap the picture?
They made friends with her.
Wow.
They made friends with her at the start of the race, just hanging out, like, oh, this is so fun. At the end, like, oh, yeah, well, I'll take a photo. I'll send it to you. Like,
brilliant.
That's very normal. You kind of like your way to the starting line. You chat with people, like, and they just completely spearfished her.
Wow.
Talk about social engineering. That is impressive.
Fantastic. I am a cybersecurity champion at my workplace. I catch 100 out of 100 phishing attempts, all the little simulated phishing attacks they do. I catch them all. I've got all the fancy things attached to my email signature. That one would have got me. That one would have got me. I've heard things as simple as just people just going past a company and just chucking USB.
Oh yeah, no,
into parking lots. That's old school, but
that's an old school thing. Yeah, they used
but like,
to drop
who
a
wouldn't
bunch
do
of
it? Like, hey, what's on this thing?
Yeah, drop a bunch of USBs in in the CIA parking lot or something, right?
That's
Like, yeah,
crazy that it works, but it's again, it's
yeah,
like, oh, did I drop this? Is this mine? Well, let's see what's on it. Maybe there's some good info, and then the next thing you know, here
yeah,
we are. I love
yeah,
I hate to say I love because I feel bad thinking how awesome that picture attack is, but
yeah,
that's a good one. Wow.
yeah.
Oh man. So okay, so that's an unexpected risk, right? So let me ask you this: what are I think the big thing with everybody now is data privacy. Okay, how can I make sure that my data is secure? Hey, this little thing over here in the corner of the room that is in every household now for one of the big tech companies. When I say her name, she answers me. Is she listening? I'm pretty sure she's listening. That's all expected, right? We kind of in our brain, we're like, that's where it's coming from. What are some of the unexpected risk? Like, what are some things that you have run into where you're like, wow, I didn't even think about that one. Hello there, friends of the Paddy Wagon. If you've picked up on anything by now from listening to our show, it is that I am brutally honest and we'll talk about anything that's going on in my life. Pretty easygoing guy overall, but things like stress, anger, self-confidence, sleep issues, they affect me the same way they do millions of other people. Whatever you're dealing with, Andrea at Somatic Therapy NYC, she offers personal sessions tailored to your unique needs. Her approach combines the wisdom of the body with the power of therapeutic touch, mindfulness, and movement, helping you to unlock your potential for deep and lasting change. If you're ready to experience the transformative power of somatic therapy, visit somatictherapynyc.com to learn more and schedule your first session. Discover how good it feels to be truly in harmony with yourself.
Yeah, well, I think, look, away from technology for a second, then I'll get back to technology, is some of the unexpected risks for these companies are actually going to end up being kind of legal and compliance risks, where they may wake up one day and go, oh my God, how do we get fined $1 billion for that, right? And that's kind of already happened. Amazon got fined almost $1 billion in Europe for revealing personally identifiable information. So they violated the GDPR act, right? So they're still fighting it and all that good stuff. But all right, well, that's a pretty unexpected risk. Oh, we're going to save all this money and effort. We're going to get AI.
Yeah.
Like, whoops, end up paying some huge fine. Like, oh, well, I guess that wasn't maybe the best idea to do that not safely, right? So I think that's one risk that nobody's really thinking about at most of these companies, right? Like, what's the legal and compliance risk in the future? Because it's unlikely to happen today, but
Right.
at some point. I think the larger risk to many of these companies, going back to spending, is how quickly these systems and the hardware is becoming obsolete. In other words, so good example is NVIDIA is planning for a 2-year CapEx cycle on their AI chips. 2 years, meaning they expect users to replace all of their chips every 2 years. That sounds pretty expensive, given that some of these chips
cheap.
are $40,000 a pop, right?
And then here's the thing: are they going to offer support for the people that say, no, I know you're saying life cycle's 2 years. I'm going to try to squeeze 4 years out of it. Is NVIDIA or companies like that going to say, well, fine, but our support stops here? Then that's a whole other issue you run into.
And then the other related issue is you have all these companies that ran out there and trained their own models, built their own models and all that kind of stuff. They're already massively obsolete, right? So I think if you'd gone 2 years ago and said, hey, you're building your own AI model, how long do you think that's going to last? Like, oh, 3, 4, 5 years. Yeah, we're good. Like, no, it's like the life cycle of these models is measured in months, right? So they're saying that the most advanced models next year will cost $1 billion with a B dollars to build. Like, how many companies are going to be able to do that? The next generation of models will cost $10 billion with a B to build. Like, who can spend that kind of money every couple of years? It's a pretty short list of companies, right?
There's not many, and it'll get to the point where you can count them on one hand if you already can't, right?
Yeah.
That's scary to me. That's the sort of thing that is scary, because then it gives all the power to a very select few, which is when you hear people's complaints, it's this company is too powerful. This has, and again, we're talking about the tech companies, and, I'm not going to name any of them, but we know who they all are. There's legal issues. There's antitrust lawsuits. There's, our algorithms are doing this. We're censoring these people, but not these people. And then, back to the kind of the privacy concerns. How do you begin, or say how can these companies earn our trust? It's when they're saying like, hey, I know we've had our issues in the past. Check out this AI tool we have. It's far more powerful than anything we've ever done. And it's like, wait, I didn't trust you the first time. I really don't trust you now. And that's where you come in and kind of, I hate to say be the watchdog, but you kind of have to be and say, here's sort of some of the things we're seeing, and this can present a problem, right? Risk management.
Yeah. Well, look, I think, ethics is always very tricky. And as I mentioned earlier, like ethics from different countries or different views, right? And you even end up with ethics problems where two rational human beings can have different answers. You've got the whole like, well, you got the train going down the tracks and it's about to hit, 10 people, but if you pull this lever, we'll only hit one person. What should you do? Like all that kind of stuff, right? Like, are people thinking about that is, when they program self-driving cars? Like probably to some degree, right? And even more important in terms of if you're buying one of those cars is if it ends up in a situation where it can save your life or save the life of someone standing in the street, what's it going to do, right? Is it going to run you into the wall and save that person, or is it going to run that person over and kill them and save your life? I don't know. Like, at a minimum, one would expect that to be made transparent to the buyer of a car, right?
Right.
What's it going to do in that situation when you've got all this autopilot and all that kind of stuff. So going back to like, how can a third party like AI Risk Inc. help in this case? Look, a lot of these ethics questions are so deeply embedded in these models, it's hard to tease them out. So we're more looking at this big picture, like, let's make sure data is encrypted. Let's make sure AI is private. Let's make sure there's not kind of overt bias and toxic language and all this kind of basic stuff that we, protect, not safe for work topics, all this stuff
Right.
that we do for the internet now, right? Got to do that for AI, right? Guess what? The other issue is these models are non-deterministic. It is very, very hard to test for edge cases. And in addition, there's a lot of ways, unfortunately, to fool these models into doing things they're not supposed to. So, for example, our software has a lot of, as literally a million records of different types of attacks on Gen AI and patent pending software to detect those attacks and block them before they hit the AI, right? There's so the different things, Dan style attacks and prompt injections and skeleton keys and things like that, all of which we block. It's a whole new category that was identified in academic research a couple months ago called math-based attacks, where you basically frame your hacking attempt as a math problem.
Interesting.
And then it sneaks its way through, basically, right? And so obviously we're working on blocking those as well. But look, people are creative. Eventually these things are going to, it's someone who's very persistent today can kind of break through all these different layers eventually, right? It might take a while. It might get detected and flagged, so the account's shut down, things like that. But it's very, very hard to completely lock down Gen AI from different kinds of attacks.
So when you say the math problem, it disguises itself as a math problem. Mm-hmm. One of the things I see, so I'm not a big social media person, but for the sake of the podcast, it's helpful. Put some clips out and do some research on some of the guests and whatnot, and just, have fun, create some fun clips. But as is the rabbit hole, you go down and you sit there and you're like, well, I've been looking at this thing for an hour. And so one of the things I see a lot of is, and if I'm off, let me know. It'll be like I bet you can't solve this math problem. And you look at it and it's a very simple problem. But what you see is when you go to the comment section, you see different answers. And then I'm sitting there saying, these people are arguing with one another about what is the right, right? The FOIL method when you come to math, first outside, inside, last. Depending on how you were taught, you would get a different answer. And so does that make sense? I will pause there.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I'd say that these are, when I say math attacks, they're almost more like logic type things.
But to confuse, right? Is the attempt to confuse the artificial intelligence?
Yeah, it's to confuse it, not to confuse the underlying AI, but to confuse the policy layer that's detecting and attempting to stop attacks. And one of the things I'll point out is that, look, it's not that the OpenAIs of the world are saying, oh, yeah, we're just not going to worry about attacks or bias or anything like that. They're trying their best. The issue is they release a model version. That version remains static for a while. And the bad guys go out there, they run a generalized adversarial network or GAN against it, and they figure out where the holes in the armor are, right? And that's where they can attack, basically. If you have another hidden layer like the AI risk software, now you got to get through us and through OpenAI, right? That's much harder. You basically it's the classic cybersecurity principle of defense in depth, right? You just want to have as many layers of defense as you can, and also the big difference between our layer and the internal policy layer for these models is we can detect stuff and flag it back to the cybersecurity team. Like if someone's using ChatGPT at home and something bad happens, like you're not finding out, right? How are you going to find that out, right? Yeah. In our case, it's all centralized, one single pane of glass, looking at all AI. Everybody's going through a hub. Everything's going through cybersecurity. Like things are getting flagged and tested, and the command center is getting notified. There's all kinds of algorithms running, trying to figure stuff out. Like that's totally different than like, oh, I've got 100 people using ChatGPT online. I'm sure it'll be fine, right? Like, yeah.
Oh my goodness. We talked about movies a couple times, and again, it's laughable, right? But you mentioned in Japan, they've got a different kind of view on AI. It's not as negative as what we have here. We always reference the Terminator. I love war games. I think it was I just loved it. And it still applies to today, right? Yeah, it's goofy scenes, right? There's a lot of people now that don't know the modems where you put the analog phone down and you dial and all of that stuff. But the scene where it is tic-tac-toe, trying to solve problems and predict the outcome, and they end up tying every time. Nobody wins, which I think is the point of the movie. But all these things that are in that movie, a lot of those would still apply today. So are there movies like that just miss it? Because they all seem to somewhere along the line, like how did they come up with it, right? Did the person who wrote the Terminator consult with a computer person, or did they just guess it? It's just one of those things where you see all this stuff, and what was War Games, mid-'80s, 85, 86?
Yeah, mid-'80s.
Right? And it's a very scary movie. And I've heard they've run different scenarios through some of these artificial intelligence tools, regarding like World War III. And it is like, well, the outcomes aren't good. It's it took 8 minutes for diplomacy to break down, and everybody on Earth is dead. And it's like, we hear that. That's really scary. But is there anything that we can learn from some of these? Again, we laugh at it, but the movies, right?
Yeah. Well, a couple interesting things. One is first of all, I got to tell you, there's an incredible Far Side cartoon from Gary Larson, right?
Love the
So
Far Side. I miss the calendars. I used to have them all the time.
yeah, so it's a bunch of generals sitting in one of these command centers, all the screens around and things like that, and there's like an Alexa sitting in the middle of it. And on the video, you see all these missiles, like, heading for Russia, right? And the general's yelling at Alexa, "No, Alexa, I said order lunch instead of launch." So, so back to war games,
That's
right?
funny.
Like,
That's
yeah, a lot
really
of that
funny.
yeah, a lot of it seems pretty apropos today. What I'd say is, look, one of the things I've advocated for, and plenty of people are advocating for, is you can't let computers control the launch codes, right? You just can't, right? And beyond that, there are plenty of people, I don't know all the details, who have done a bunch of game theory around this. And it says, well, when your opponent has, your adversary has computers controlling the launch codes, then they can launch really fast. And if there's a human in the loop over here, maybe we don't have time to react and we're hosed. So you end up in this race to the bottom where everybody's just like, all right, we're just gonna have the computers control it. We just have to obviously resist that and not
Yeah,
do it. And even if a bunch of bad guys do it, just don't do it,
just
right?
don't.
And convince them, like, yeah, that's just a bad idea, right? Because I think we can all agree on that putting the fate of the human race in the hands of computers, probably not a great idea.
It's bad enough it's in our hands sometimes.
Yeah,
It truly
exactly.
is. We're our own worst enemy, and why add a computer into the mix? So,
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think the what else can we learn from movies? Like, I do like the movie Blade Runner. I think it was a great
oh yeah,
performance by Harrison Ford, all that. And I think what's interesting there is they imbue computers with feelings, right? And I think that's super interesting because right now computers definitely don't have feelings, right? And I'm just curious, like, all right, so when we create eventually, I do believe we'll create an AGI and a computer with consciousness. Like, will it have the same feelings as humans or totally different feelings? I have no idea. Um, it's effectively creating an alien on the planet, right? Like, and we don't know
wow,
how that alien is going to behave or if it will have ethics or not, or like it's just, I think that is something that's really important for people to understand is that the outcome of that is there are a lot of unknown unknowns,
yeah,
right? And when Elon Musk and other people say, "Oh, we need to be really careful," existential risk, like I'm not like, "Oh yeah, don't do it because there's existential risk." I just think we've got to very, very carefully manage risk around those creations, right? And look, if we were all rowing the boat in the same direction on the planet, maybe it'd say, yeah, maybe we shouldn't do that. But given that, Russia's basically at war with the West and China really just wishes they could just, take over the world next week,
yeah,
probably not a great idea to just stop development of AI in the U.S.
yeah. It's kind of like a computer Cold War in a way, right? It's just
Yeah.
you just keep building it up until, well, you know, let's not say until because I don't even want to think about it. But do you think it's possible? Because I think the greatest supercomputer is in our heads. We think of things that computers can't. Like you talk about emotion, you talk about feelings. I can tell you a
Hmm.
joke. I could say a joke to 5 different people. One's offended, one doesn't laugh, the other thinks it's the funniest thing there. The other person doesn't get it, right? So when you think about feelings, they're all unique to us, right? How does a
Yeah.
computer translate
Yeah.
that? It's
Yeah. I don't,
really interesting.
yeah. I don't even know where that's going to end up. So have you seen the three body problem yet? The TV show, or read the book or anything like that?
No.
So very interesting. It was written by a Chinese author. It's basically about aliens that are going to end up here on the U.S. in 150 years, and like, oh, how does the human race kind of deal with that over time? And they discovered that the aliens can actually have taken over our networks and can hear what we're saying and emailing and things like that. So they basically have designated a certain number of humans to formulate the response plan, but all they can do is talk among each other and tell people what to do. They can't write anything down or
Because they
email
know
or tell on the phone because the aliens can't read thoughts, right? So I think that's a super interesting approach. That could end up being pretty similar to what you're talking about. We're like, well, I don't know what's going to happen with computers, right? Like, all right, well, it may come down to like, okay, don't say anything when Alexa's listening, right?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. Like you think about, like, I think about how you just kind of want to do a reset on certain things. I can't tell you how many times I just wish I had an old school flip phone, or I didn't have a cell phone at all and I had one hanging on the wall of the house.
Yeah.
Or the one person on this earth that won't be hacked is the little old woman with a change purse and a checkbook. I think I'm going to get some milk. Here's $1.69 for a half gallon of milk. Like, she's not, and it's funny.
Yeah, she's not getting hacked.
She's not getting hacked, right?
Yeah.
So, what would you say some of the big misconceptions are with AI? And I'm sure there's so many of them, but as a whole, would it just be around the negative aspects, or where are we getting it wrong?
Well, I think one of the big things is, especially Gen AI, is very authoritative. Like, it's the classic, always sounds authoritative, but not always right. And I've definitely seen that myself with ChatGPT or other tools, right? So it's kind of trust but verify. Very rarely does it say something like, "Hey, Mike, I'm not so sure about this. I think the Statue of Liberty was built in 1876 or something like that," right?
Right.
Like it usually just gives you something that's a definitive answer that could be totally wrong. So I think that's something that we're just going to need to get used to. Number one, it is going to get better over time as the tech improves, and we'll have different algorithms checking answers and things like that. But that's something that we just haven't solved at this point, right? You can get a wrong answer that sounds very authoritative. So that's important to understand and kind of trust but verify. And we do things at AI Risk to improve the odds that the answer is correct and dramatically reduce hallucinations, but nothing's perfect yet. Other misconceptions, I think it goes back to the whole, oh my God, the computers are going to take my job.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty unlikely in the near term for the vast, vast majority of jobs. There are exceptions. Like, so the largest employers in the Philippines are basically these call centers, right? Where people call up and have questions or whatever. You've got people who speak very good English or very well, who are relatively well educated, can answer those questions, look them up on a computer or whatever. Like, if those aren't all, not all, but if I'd be very surprised if a lot of those jobs don't disappear in the next 5 or 10 years being replaced by AI. You are still going to need some humans for like really out of the box stuff.
Right.
But for the standard stuff, like, hey, I need to pay my credit card or whatever, like, yeah, absolutely. You'll be able to do that with AI for sure, like 95+% of the time. So, but that I think is the exception.
I agree. You know what? I read an article. It's funny that, I don't know if we're referencing the same thing, but their exact percentage in the article was really only 5% of jobs on Earth can kind of be taken by AI, right? If you want to say the word, they're taking our jobs. But that's interesting, right? Because there's so many, as a recruiter, we have a ton of tools that we can use to make our jobs easier. I have scheduling tools that will allow, I can just click a few buttons. It'll send you an email. Hey, it's great to meet you. Right? Thanks for applying. I'd like to set up some time to talk with you. You say, yeah, let's set up some time. It looks at my calendar, your calendar, it gets it on. Then we've got a Teams meeting and we chat, right? So there's a lot of, I think it makes the majority of jobs better. It allows us to be more efficient in the things that we do and focus on things like problem solving and the people aspect. At least speaking for myself, a lot of what I do is, again, dealing with people and dealing with situations that quite frankly, I don't think a computer can solve. I mean, I've yet to see an AI tool that can put a resume in front of me that looks like it's a good fit 90% of the time. And a lot of them are actually quite bad. Like people aren't qualified. And I'm like, wait, it gave this person a fit score of 95. I wouldn't pick up the phone to talk to this person. No disrespect to that person, but based off of the job description and what you have on the resume, it matches those, and it does a really bad job sometimes. And I'm thinking that should be one of the easy ones. But there's just that human element that sometimes it just doesn't get it. And so I do feel that the majority of us would be safe, but we should embrace some of these tools because they really are they're game changers.
Yeah, like I said before, like if you're not doing it 5 years from now, you probably are not in the same job, unless you're a dentist, in which case you're good.
You're good. Yeah, like they make tools, they make robots that we can use that assist in things like surgeries and so on. So, okay. Well, little secret, I would like to know I've deceived our listeners today, and I've deceived you, and I would like to come clean about it. For the sake of this, I want our listeners to know that I had ChatGPT write almost all of the questions to talk with you today.
Cool. That's pretty good. Yeah, you had a busy day, Mike. Like you had to cut some corners somewhere.
Right? And I just thought, it was like, you know what? We're going to talk with this guy. It would be fun to just plug some of these in and say like, hey, write me. I forget what I said. I think it was write me some podcast interview questions for an industry leading AI risk management, professional. And it was really cool to,
Yeah. And Mike, I have a secret too. Like I'm actually a robot, and all of these questions have been answered by ChatGPT.
I love it. Oh my goodness. Well, so let's do this. We've talked a lot about some scenarios that we come into and things where we can use our heads, right, to try to make the best of the world that we're in as it relates to technology. But in regards to your company and the things that you do, I'd like to kind of turn it over to you for a minute and just kind of talk about what it is that you do and let our listeners know where they can find you and just some of the things that you really kind of help out with in addition to what you've already let us know.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. Look, what we're primarily doing is accelerating adoption of Gen AI at companies. And you could have 30 people or 1,000 people. That's a great size for us because in general, a lot of those companies are just kind of blocking ChatGPT and have no idea what to do. And we basically show up and a day later, you've got access to all kinds of cool AI agents, which help people with their jobs and link into your data and document stores and your CRM and all kinds of cool stuff. But more importantly than that, we do the cybersecurity around it, right? So we've created the world's best user experience for chief information security officers to protect your AI. So that's really what we do. And then all these fun agents and stuff are just kind of like the icing on the cake. That being said, there are a lot of things that we do that really very few companies, if anyone, is doing right now, such as we encrypt all data in motion and at rest for large language models. Like very few companies are doing that, right? We have one of the very few cybersecurity kind of firewalls for Gen AI that can detect different kinds of attacks. We can automatically encrypt PII. We can make AI not safe for work, considered not safe for work, and also do a lot of compliance stuff. So the big compliance rule, which is still optional in the U.S., is the National Institute of Science and Technology AI Risk Management Framework. It sounds like a really, really long thing. It's actually pretty straightforward, but our software does full compliance with that. For example, if you're a company sitting there going like, ooh, we got to comply with that, it's probably going to become mandatory at some point. And certainly it's a best practices framework that the regulators are trying to use. Yeah, so we basically write software and try to make AI safe and risk manage it. And then also have a lot of education around how to use it, appropriately and safely, and spend a lot of time with people thinking about things like AI ethics and all kinds of stuff like that. Look, it's a brave new world. There are a lot of people out there like, I'm an AI expert, you know. At least I've been doing it since the 80s.
Yeah. You're old school. You're the Chat GPT
OG AI, right? So you can find us at aicrisk.com. We offer free trials of our software for companies, and what I'd say is that 95% of companies that have tried the software have bought the software, which is ridiculous if you know anything about about software. Usually it's more like 30%.
I was going to say I do know a little bit about software, and a 95% conversion rate is it's pretty good.
Yeah.
Well, fantastic, man. Well, I'll tell you what, and I will definitely plug all your information in the notes for the show. Please share it with your folks. I'm going to share it with everyone that I know, because like I said, it's I think, it sounds so cheesy, but the more we know, it really just positions us very well to have educated conversations, to not be scared, to not worry about computers taking our jobs, to not worry about Arnold Schwarzenegger driving up on a motorcycle and, attacking us from the future. Like there's a lot of wild stuff out there anymore that you hear, and we don't need any more conspiracies. So
no, but you definitely got to put the Far Side cartoon in the show notes.
I have to look at that one, because that's the one I don't recall seeing, and that's my personal favorite. It's always is it a deer or a bear? But he's in the crosshairs and he's pointing at the one next to him.
Yeah, right. Or the one with the birthmark that looks like a crosshair. She's like, bummer of a birthmark, Hal. That's a pretty.
I love it,
classic too. Awesome. Well, Mike, thanks so much for spending time with me. This has been really fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you coming on, and thank you everybody for joining in and listening to another episode of the Paddy Wagon. We'll see you guys later.